If you are hand basting the stitching line on the left front side, you can go ahead and skip this next part of the video. If you went ahead and marked the stitching line like I did, we are now going to baste using the machine. So the first thing that I'm doing is, since I am going to be basting the right side, I am going to tuck the excess fabric so that it will fit in this little window a little bit easier. So go ahead and tuck the fabric, but not enough so that it causes wrinkles on this side of your fabric. You still want it flat enough when you're feeding it through the machine. So go ahead and tuck your fabric and then find your marked line. You're going to stitch right along that line. Before we start stitching, what makes a based stitch different than a regular stitching in a garment is that you are going to be making very long stitches so that it's easy to remove later on. Right now I have my stitch set at about a 12, which is what I'll be using for this garment usually because I really like short stitches, but since I'm basting, I'm going to actually set that to 6, which is a pretty long stitch. When you're basting by machine, you also don't want to backstitch. So feed your fabric in the machine, set down your foot, grab your threads, and remember, no backstitching. Here we go. I'm still kind of getting used to the speed of my machine. You should be trying to keep a constant, even speed on your machine and not kind of starting, stopping like I'm doing. So I'm not quite talented enough. Now I'm getting to the curve at the end of the stitch, which is, curve is always a little bit challenging for me. So what I try to do is when I'm making the curve, I put the needle down into the fabric, pick up the foot, and actually manually turn the fabric to try to follow the stitch a little bit more. They're not bad. Now again, since this is a baste, I want to leave a very long tail so that's easy to remove. So go ahead and hold your thread right at the point where you stop stitching. Pull, leave a really nice long tail, clip, and there's my basting by machine. Step 2 in your sewing instructions calls for edge finishing the outside of this curve on both of your pieces. What they want you to do is turn your fabric to the wrong side, and along this edge turn about 1/4 of a quarter inch under, and then either serge overlock or zigzag stitch this part. Before I sew, I like to take my fabric to my handy dandy ironing board and actually iron in that crease so it's a little bit easier to stitch. I'm just hand balling the 1/4 inch turn under, taking my iron set to cotton and ironing it out just like that. Do it all the way down the side of the flap on both of your pieces, both the left side and the right side. Turns out like this. Once you've ironed in that crease on the edge of the flap of your boxers, go ahead and take it back to your sewing machine. Remember to change your stitch length since you're no longer basting, you actually are edge finishing this. So I'm going to set it back to 12 because again I really like tiny stitches, and I'm going to set my machine for a zigzag. You'll probably want to pull out your sewing machine manual if you are not used to this, since every machine is different. Mine is a Singer from the 1970s, and the way that I do a zigzag is by changing the stitch width. So I'm going to set it to 2, and I'm going to keep my needle position as a center, so it's going to go back and forth along the center. Stitch length is 12. And I'm going to set it right at the very edge, so my needle is lined up with the very edge of my crease, right along here. Hold your thread so you don't end up with a thread ball, and you're actually going to backstitch. So here we go. The way that you backstitch is, on my machine, you actually hold down the stitch control, which causes the needle to go backwards and reinforce your stitching. Just let the feed dogs take your fabric, guide it, move it along, but don't fight it. The feed dogs are there to help you. They are your friends. If you have to stop for whatever reason, make sure that you stop with your needle in the thread. Don't pull it all the way out with your needle in the fabric. That way when you come back, you don't have to worry about if your fabric got moved or jostled. The needle is right where it should be. And again at the end, I'm going to backstitch. And stitch over it again. Pull my needle out. Grab my threads. Pull. This time I'm actually going to clip much closer to the fabric since I'm not going to be pulling out the stitching, I hope. And voila! You have a zigzagged finished edge for your boxers. So do that to both your left and your right piece, and we'll move on to the next sewing step.